I know my bookshelf looks really weird behind me, and that's because I'm filming on a new camera and I don't know if there's a way to fix that. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Cheryl, and today I'm here to bring you my review for Terry Goodkind's Stone of Tears. Now I'm gonna have to ask you to bear with me because, as you can probably tell by my voice, I am currently sick. So yeah, so this book, it is almost 1,000 pages long in a mass market, which makes it really awkward to read. It took me almost a month to read this book, and that's just because I decided to split it up into 3 different sections to be able to make it a little more manageable. It is a reread for me, so I just knew personally that I would be able to tackle this book if it was split up into parts as opposed to trying to read through the whole thing at once. And at the very end of the book, I was very frustrated because after I finished reading it, I don't know how I feel about it. I have some issues with it, but I also have some things I like about it. But this will be a spoiler-free review, which means that I will do my pro-con list so you guys can kind of figure out why I ultimately gave this book a 2.75 out of 5. So basically, if you don't know, this book is the second book in the Sword of Truth series by Terry Goodkind. It's a adult high fantasy series that follows 2 main characters. Richard, who is basically the Seeker, which is a man dedicated to truth and all things right, and he has a slew of other abilities, etc. that goes with that, and he wields a sword. And it follows Kalan, who, I think that's how you pronounce her name, who is the Mother Confessor. Basically, she is a woman able to touch anyone, I believe, and make them immediately, I don't really even know how to describe it. Basically, if she touches someone, they fall under her magic or her spell and lose all form of free will, and all they want to do is please her and make her happy. She can basically use this power to tell someone to kill themselves or to die. They will die immediately. So basically, she is a super powerful woman, he is a very powerful man, and it follows their story. And they are the worst case of insta-love I have read about in a long time. It happened in the first book. They had known each other a month, and then all of a sudden they had this groundbreaking, world-shattering love for each other that transcended all magic, transcended all boundaries. No one before them had this sort of love. They were the first, and that was after a month of knowing each other, which frustrated me to no end. And their love is so boring, but I will get to that later. Overall, I think my biggest gripe with this book is that there was so much info dumping. It did not need to be this long. Genuinely, it could have probably been about a 500, 600 page book, and you would have gotten just the same amount of story from it, but you wouldn't have 10 pages of a person having an internal monologue about something random. But yeah, like I said, because this is the second book in the series, I can't really give you a synopsis without spoiling anything. Plus, a lot happened in this book. It is 1,000 pages long. A synopsis for what happened in this is basically an entire video in and of itself. So I'm just going to get straight to my pro-con list. We'll talk about the pros because that's what's the shorter list. I am a sucker for fantasy, especially high fantasy, so I love this story. I fell in love with the characters way back a long time ago when I read it for the first time. I just love high fantasy, and this one is chock full of the fantasy tropes you are used to seeing. It's got the chosen one, it's got dragons, it's got magic, so I instinctively love it for that reason, which I know that's not necessarily a good thing, but because it's high fantasy, it kept me entertained. And pro number 2 is the fact that there are a lot of elements in this story that you see come together from the first book to the second book, which I assume continues on in the series because it is a fairly long series. You basically see characters interact that you didn't know that they were going to interact, stories start unfolding or intertwining with each other in a way that is genuinely interesting, especially with storylines you didn't ever expect to cross. Terry Goodkind is pretty good about making them intertwine in a believable way. My third and final pro for this is that it does follow a wide cast of characters. Now that is not to say diverse characters, and I will talk about that in a minute, but it does follow a wide set of characters, meaning there are a lot of points of views. In the story, it's not just Richard and Kalan like it was in the first book, basically. You follow a handful of characters who pop up in and out of the story depending on what's happening in the book, and some of them I genuinely became interested in. So let's get to the long con list. Number 1, this book, like I said, has a wide cast of characters, but they are absolutely in no way diverse. The only diversity you have is with age ranges. There are characters that are very, very young, and there's characters that are very, very old. But everyone is basically white in the story. Everyone is straight. The only people who were gay in the story were child molesters. So that is a terrible, terrible representation. And if that makes you uncomfortable, I would not recommend this series because of that. But I'm hoping maybe later in the series there's some diversity brought in, because right now this is the blandest cast of characters I have ever read about, I think. And this next con is something that I don't know if it's a con or if it's just me being nitpicky. And it's something I didn't notice until I was like later in the book. But a lot of women of power, if they are not a queen, they are referred to as a mother something, a mother of something. To me, it says that the power and strength of a woman only comes from the fact that she can bear children. I don't know if that's just me looking too much into it, or if that is even a negative thing. There's nothing wrong with being a mother. But I just feel like every woman of power in this story is referred to as a mother of something. Con number 3, or problem number 3 I have with the story, is that every single female of age fell in love with this main character, Richard. And he did not, return their love. There was no cheating because he's in love with Kalan, remember, world-shattering love and all of that. But every single female fell in love with this man, and I don't understand why. He gets introduced to this one character, and after, a very, very short amount of time, a few days, she's basically, she hits on him, and she's like, you know what, you're the man I love from now on. I'm never gonna love another the way I love you. And she was like, you're the most perfect man ever. I love you so much. And, it's just not realistic. Con number 4 is one I briefly mentioned already, and that is the love between Richard and Kalan is just so boring. I feel like if he had drawn it out maybe more in the first book and even in the second book, it would not be this way. But, you got a white hetero couple, which you see everywhere, with nothing unique about them, except for that they are the most powerful magical beings in this, world, who love each other. There's, nothing. Nothing keeps me invested in these characters. Con number 5 is, like I said before, there was just way, way, way too much info dumping. I would read page upon page upon page that probably could have been concisely condensed into, 1 or maybe 2 paragraphs. There was no reason for it, especially because he doesn't even use that flowery of language. He just finds, 15 different ways to say the same damn sentence or phrase over and over and over again, we got it the first time. And the last con I have with this is one that I don't know if this is maybe a personal thing because I'm rereading the story and I'm a lot more critical of it, but I'm just not as invested in this as I was the first time I read it. I just didn't find the characters that interesting. When super tragic things would happen, I would just kind of be like, I would either see them coming or they just didn't affect me when they happened. I just found pretty much every aspect of the story to be fairly unoriginal and boring. And yeah, it's just Terry Goodkind took a lot of elements from various other fantasy stories and wrote them into his own, so as a result, it's just unoriginal. He also gets very preachy with his politics, which I'll talk about in a moment, but as a result, I just don't think it was worth it to read this 1,000-page book for me to be like, I'm uninvested in this story, I'm uninvested in these characters. So yeah, I will be continuing the series just because, from what I've heard, Terry Goodkind gets even worse and even crazier with his preaching later in the series, and I'm very curious to see if what I've read about it is true, and I can't just pick up the 5th book in the series and expect to follow along. So basically what I mean by Terry Goodkind is preachy is that he definitely follows a lot of Ayn Rand's philosophies, and Ayn Rand is known for being very, very extreme in a lot of her views, and so he follows a lot of the politics. There's a lot of allusion to various forms of government such as... Thank you, Milo. There's allusions to various forms of government such as socialism and communism and all of these and why they are the devil, basically. There's a lot of allusions to gun control and all of this kind of stuff. And he doesn't preach too much in the first couple books, but apparently he gets kind of crazy in the later books, which, like I said, the reason I'm reading to figure out if that's true. Also, he doesn't call himself a fantasy author. And I don't disrespect him for that, but I'm very confused because his books contain magic, wizards, dragons, and all of these other elements of a fantasy story, and he refuses to acknowledge himself as a fantasy writer. Instead, he considers himself an author that puts realistic characters in different situations to see how they'd react, which I don't understand personally. You're a fantasy author if you include fantasy elements, but that's just my personal belief, and that's getting off topic. So anyway, that's my rambly, spoiler-free review for Terry Goodkind's Stone of Tears. Like I said, I will be continuing the series just to see if it does get as crazy as people say later on. I personally give this book a 2.75. It's a very tentative rating for me, just because I did enjoy the story enough to finish it. I didn't feel like I was torturing myself to finish it, but there were so many problematic elements of the story, and there were so many things I just didn't like. As always, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and follow me on all of my social medias, which are always linked down below, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!